You, the viewers, asked, and here it is, Torkoal. I'm surprised we haven't done this already. Third generation fans will remember its debut as Gym Leader Flannery's strongest Pokemon. Then Ash went on to have one in the anime, and even the best Pokemon games, Mystery Dungeon Time, Darkness, and Sky, features Torkoal as the town elder, whose wisdom plays a crucial role in the story. Now we've got a lot to get through, so we're jumping right into Torkoal's humble beginnings as we ask, how good was Torkoal actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. With sub-Snorlax speed, even being one of two fire types with both Eruption and Explosion wasn't enough to get Torkoal a niche in Gen 3 OU, despite the fact that, unlike Camerupt, Torkoal boasted the same base defense stat as Skarmory, and with 5 more base HP. Impressive as this was, the bulk itself wasn't getting it anywhere without any sort of recovery options, especially since mono fire typing is hardly well suited for walling. Nor was Torkoal able to translate this bulk into any sort of meaningful threat with only decent base 85 offenses. The aforementioned non-speed, and a lack of move pool. Unlike Camerupt, who had its solid offenses, base 40 speed stat that somehow was the far better option, being able to outspeed Snorlax and stab Earthquake. Torkoal basically had to hope stab Fire Blast alongside a hidden power and status move would be sufficient to ensure it could do something before exploding, which it might have been had it been faster and stronger, but the fact that it was so unthreatening in this regard meant even the boom wasn't getting it very far, so much so that even Yu was well beyond its grasp. For much of Gen 3, Torkoal was pretty much a non-existent Pokemon, but eventually Gen 3 NU came into being. There, Torkoal was able to establish more than just a niche, it was a straight-up great Pokemon. Amidst the slew of not fully evolved Pokemon, Torkoal's stats fitted in just fine, and thus it was able to utilize a number of solid sets. It was quite the hit taker, being able to tank physical attacks from tier staples like Hitmonchan and Pidgeot, and could lean into this bulk with a tank set, running Protect to grab as much leftovers recovery as possible, while more ably toxic stalling opponents, though it also often ran Explosion over Protect or the Hidden Power coverage slot, which gave it great in-battle flexibility. The long game with Toxic and possibly Protect as well, the instant KO of Boom, Torkoal was able to adapt all of this depending on the matchup, often being able to pull off both. Sometimes it went with a more aggressive approach of Substitute, Toxic, and Explosion. This set made for a fine lead, setting a fast-paced tempo for hard-hitting offensive teams. Torkoal could also run a Rest Talk set, and while its reinforcement of its own valuable health was appreciated, as it was no longer having to run from opposing Toxics, it was much more limited in terms of move pool, and the ensuing passivity took away a lot of what made Torkoal so great, which was the fact that even while it was so tanky, it was dangerous. Overall, the tier that would take it in didn't exist for a long time, but once Gen 3 NU came around, it gave Torkoal the opportunity to have a great debut generation, which it needed, because for the several gens to follow, things were gonna get rough. But before we document more of the harsh years for Torkoal, don't let cyber thieves break into your cybersecurity with today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. We are all at risk of cybersecurity threats, especially in public spaces. I travel a decent amount, so I'm always working on the go. This means I have to log into my private accounts frequently on public Wi-Fis, but there could be suspicious people trying to access my sensitive data. That's why I always protect myself with Surfshark VPN, or Virtual Private Network. A virtual private network is a server that you can connect to that encrypts your private data and keeps it safe from others lurking on that network. You can even use this to pretend like you're in another country. Now, why would this come in handy? Well, with streaming services like Netflix, you're often region locked. For example, if I were to vacation in Japan, where there are no subtitles on my anime, I could use Surfshark and change my VPN back to the US or vice versa, and now I have American Netflix wherever I go. You can do this with multiple countries because Surfshark has over 4,500 plus servers in over 140 countries. Surfshark meets all of your cybersecurity needs in one singular program. Also, one subscription lets you log into unlimited devices, and there's no risk in trying Surfshark thanks to their 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you want a sick VPN and also support the channel to help us produce more content, you can click the link in the description below and go to surfshark.com/fallswipe or use code fallswipe at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. It wasn't that Torkoal was passed over. No, not at all. In fact, it got 3 of the best moves in the game. The best move in the game, Stealth Rock, the move that countered the best move in the game, Rapid Spin, and while it also got Will-O-Wisp, so did every other fire type. Yet most of them didn't get another new move of Torkoal's, Lava Plume, the perfect move for a utility fire Pokemon, able to attack with stab and threaten 30% burns. It couldn't have been given better gifts. Between Lava Plume burns and Yawn threatening sleep, Torkoal was absolutely loaded with utility, setting the game's most important important hazard, removing all hazards, and dishing out status galore, including with a decently powered stab move. So it wasn't utterly passive or completely shut down by taunt. It could also still throw Explosion over Nguyen in that 4th move slot to really make it a defensive Pokemon with some pop to it. And yet, Torkoal was a complete non-entity in Gen 4. Some players tried it in UU because Rock Spin, Status Stab, and Boom. Well, these are all utility moves so effective that they tend to launch Pokemon to viability almost by themselves, let alone in conjunction like this, so Torkoal had to have something going for it, right? Sadly, nope. The Heat Ran of UU that its move pool would suggest, Torkoal was certainly not. Being this slow, in UU terms slower than Slowbro, and being Stealth Rock weak was just too much to handle when its bulk, already tenuous for lack of recovery, was so susceptible to being overwhelmed to begin with. Relying on a Stealth Rock weak Pokemon to spin is not a reliable proposition. But what about NU? Nope, Torkoal couldn't escape its flaws even down there. This time it was being slower than Slowking, as well as the fact that the tier's best rapid spinners, Hitmonchan and Sandslash, both resisted Stealth Rock, while Sandslash also set it up and was physically bulky to boot. And the tier's plethora of excellent fire types meant Torkoal wasn't going to be eking out any sort of offensive niche either. As great as its new tools were, Torkoal couldn't quite manage in Generation 4. And it was a similar story in Gen 5, right down to getting another amazing new move, Shell Smash, whose brokenness had propelled several previously meager Pokemon to terrifying heights, but Torkoal would not be one of them. Base 20 speed was so well and truly pathetic, even doubling it wouldn't help it outrun anything even moderately fast. A max speed Torkoal would hit a stat of 304 at +2. This meant it couldn't outrun positive natured base 90s. It was kind of like the problem Turtonator had in Gen 7 and on, except Turtonator's comparatively zippy 36 base speed made it positively fast and furious in comparison to Torkoal's gratuitous brand of slow cinema. Torkoal dropped to NU again, but there was really nothing for it to do. Shell Smash was its only real chance at a niche, as its defensive set that hadn't hacked it in Gen 4's NU certainly wasn't going to be keeping up with this newly power-crept iteration of the tier. As such, Torkoal racked up a second consecutive generation of having several of the most impactful, desirable moves in the game and being able to do absolutely nothing with them. Would Gen 6 continue the trend? Well, yes and no. Yes, Torkoal was still unable to do anything, but no, it didn't get an amazing new move with which to do nothing. It could at least gesture towards the slightest of niches with slightly more gusto, though as Gen 6 formally introduced the PU tier, and while Torkoal was still gutter tier terrible, it at least seemed more feasible for someone to theoretically wrestle some halfway plausible viability out of it, given the lower base stat totals it was now surrounded by. This paper-only role was taking a cue from certain variants of Cloyster, a Shell Smasher that used the Smash boost not to sweep, but to more effectively pull off Rapid Spin. A boosted Torkoal would be able to threaten Mischievous and thus get a spin-off for a team that really needed it. So why was this only on paper and not in practice? Well, Torkoal was so awful at finding its way into battle against pretty much everything that safely boosting or spinning, let alone both, was going to be well beyond any sort of capabilities it had even in the theoretical realm. You certainly wouldn't want to rely on it at all, let alone to pull off Rapid Spin for a team that really needed it. At that point, you'd be better off restructuring the team entirely or even throwing the whole thing out rather than trying to fix the problem with Torkoal. Its complete lack of viability and usage surprised no one, and of course its old nemesis Camerupt was hanging around to outclass it with ease, en route to a place as one of the most solid Pokemon in PU. Now, things had been rough as all get out for Torkoal for many generations now, but unlike many similarly weighed upon Pokemon of its ilk, things were about to change in pretty much the biggest way imaginable. Torkoal basically didn't exist, but congratulations to James Reineke for using it on what appears to be a Trick Room team to get third at the US Nationals Juniors Division. Pretty good for no sun. With Generation 7 giving Torkoal none other than Drought, suddenly this passed-over Pokemon was a light with possibility at the support it could offer. The pains to utilize its Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin were actually worthwhile now that it was also setting such a game-breaking field condition. And if anything, this made Sun teams more efficient for not having to include these crucial utility moves on Pokemon beyond just the Sunsetter, allowing them to focus on fully maximizing their destructive potential. It was so exciting, Torkoal was actually tried on OU early on. Yes, standard play was now seeing legitimate Torkoal usage. Brief though it was, Torkoal paired with that other star of early gen Sun and Moon, Alolan Marowak, as well as the eternally terrifying Firium Z Heatran to unleash sun-fueled bursts of all-consuming infernals that rendered fire resist merely laughable delusions of safety, with Torkoal's enormous advantage over the obvious choice for an OU Sunsetter, Mega Charizard Y, being its open item slot allowing it to hold Heat Rock and thus extend the duration of the sun for the benefit of its teammates. For all its specificity, undeniable wild though it was, Torkoal led OU Sun was so terrifying that it even saw the briefest usage in serious tournament play. And not just Sun either. The firepower was so tantalizing, it even resulted in a crossover with that other strategy not often seen in singles, Trick Room. As double specific as the Sun Trick Room combination sounded, it actually worked, and with stakes attached to boot, with the replay available here. Most notably, under Trick Room, Torkoal rapid spins away opposing Stealth Rock and Toxic Spikes before exploding on Mega Garchomp to both chip it into Heatran range and get Heatran in as quickly and safely as possible to maximize the Sun and the Trick Room. The latter seen in how Heatran opts for the quiet nature, which allows it to use Eruption, which thanks to Fire EMZ and Sun, allows it to absolutely righteously delete none other than Toxapex, all thanks to Torkoal. Of course, as early generation enthusiasm fades in favor of a more established metagame, Torkoal's Sun didn't persist, but the fact that it had genuinely been used in standard play was already quite a thrill, and it was about to help wreak some serious havoc on early UU as well. There it actually did compete with Ninetales and its valuable speed, but Torkoal's utility moves and physical bulk ensured it was there right alongside the Fox in enabling all manner of controversial Sun strategies. Sun wasn't immediately devastating in UU. In fact, it went overlooked for a while on account of Rain being incredibly broken, and even after Rain's ban, Torkoal and Ninetales both dropped to RU. But then Mega Houndoom was released, and with a desire to take advantage of its solar power ability, both dropped Pokemon rocketed back into UU, and Sun teams took off, with Mega Houndoom flanked by the similarly threatening Chlorophyll Venusaur. Despite the issue of its non-existent speed, Torkoal was a major part of the Sun onslaught for how it packed the immense utility Stealth Rock and hazard removal into the Drought slot, as Sun teams generally tended to fiend for all the team slots they could get. Rapid Spin only removing the opponent's hazards was also another great advantage over running a Defogger on another Pokemon. The hazard removal was especially important for not just Torkoal itself, but Mega Houndoom, which really didn't want to take Stealth Rock damage if it could help it. Considering it was already losing health with solar power, it was a lot of maintenance, but Torkoal was a reliable enabler of Mega Houndoom's terror, and Sun took a controversial place in the metagame, with many screaming for its ban as it came to destroy pretty much the entire tier. Eventually, Mega Houndoom was the one to eat the ban. Sun teams continued to be solid, especially since Venusaur alone was a terror, but they were no longer broken. As such, their usage declined, and Torkoal again dropped to RU alongside Ninetales, where they also teamed up with Venusaur to specific yet potentially devastating effect. All this before Ultra Sun and Moon even came out. Not long after their release though, UU wanted to reintroduce Mega Houndoom to the tier, and that meant Drought as a whole ate the ban, which many argued should have been the move in the first place. No more UU for Torkoal then. What about RU? Well, this wasn't exactly a new problem, but the pre-existing issue really came to a head now, and that was that Torkoal was completely outclassed by Ninetales because Torkoal, while certainly not an inefficient Sunsetter, was only used as a Sunsetter. Ninetales, on the other hand, was a major threat in and of itself, using its Sun as fuel to propel its Nasty Plot and Choice Spec sets to among RU's most defining, dangerous threats. If you wanted a straight-up Sun team, your choice was made, and it wasn't Torkoal. Not that Sun teams were popular to begin with in this new metagame, as Venusaur was much less threatening, and rather than taking pairs to support it with Sun, you could just use Ninetales and Roserade, which were immense standalone threats that also worked well together without necessarily being explicitly reliant on the other to succeed at all. So did Torkoal take its Drought to NU? No, actually, because Drought had been banned from NU in the tier's earliest stages that generation, thanks to not just Ninetales' brief tenure there, briefly demonstrating how overpowered it was, but Vulpix, which was used just to really prove the point. Torkoal never got a chance to wreak its havoc there, or in PU for that matter, which similarly disallowed Drought. So, through a strange set of circumstances, Torkoal in the generation it received its greatest gift wound up untiered, or technically ZU, the sub-official tier below PU, yet that was more misleading than anything else, as this was easily its best generation so far, and we haven't even gotten to VGC yet. It was finally time for Torkoal to shine in VGC, not as a supporter, but as an offensive threat. That's right, with the immensely powerful stab spread move that was a Sun-fueled eruption alongside its non-existent speed, Torkoal became a ferocious Trick Room threat. As a bonus, it being so slow meant it undersped all opposing weather setters in the VGC 2017 format, like Pelipper, Politoed, and Gigalith. So in a lead matchup against them, Sun would always be active. Its eruptions and its other great stab, Heat Wave, for when it took damage and Eruption's power was lowered, were usually strengthened further by Charcoal. A full power Charcoal eruption under Sun was so strong it decked most resists, 2-hit KOing for example Alolan Marowak. However, Torkoal's eruption could also zero in for single target damage, pushing to its maximum with the enormous burst power of Fire EMZ for an utterly unreal infernal overdrive. Additionally, the coverage of Solar Beam to rip through Tapu Fini or Hidden Power Ice for Garchomp meant Torkoal had more than just Fire Stab going for it as well. But man, did that Fire Stab sting, with how it plowed through tier staples like Amoonguss and Kartana and dropped most neutral targets as well. In fact, Torkoal was so good at using Fire Stab, it could mimic your in-game Charizard and run 3 such moves alongside Protect, using Flamethrower over a coverage option so as to destroy any wide guard shenanigans on key targets like Celesteela, thinking they would prevent Eruption or Heat Wave from going off. Plus, while Torkoal was a threat itself, its Sun naturally lent itself to excellent team support, enabling a Chlorophyll user like Lilligant that doubled as a threat to the opposing weather setters that might try and come in to replace Sun. Now, Torkoal wasn't the most spammable Pokemon, as Fire-type competition was fierce in the age of Arcanine, but it was used quite a bit in 2017, and its notable placements are Conan Thompson, 15th, European International Championships London, Daniel Oztiken, 3rd at the Dutch Open, Jo-Won Kim, 2nd Athens Regionals, Ashton Cox, 1st at the Latin American International Championships, Sao Paulo, Esteban Hearn, 4th, and Victor Gons, 6th, at the La Libertad Special Event, Lai Ching Yang, 5th at the Special Event in Hong Kong, Mitch Kendrick, 4th at the Auckland Regionals, Alexandre Savona, 2nd, and then 1st at the 2 Keto Special Events, Alvaro Carrasco, 7th Special Event Madrid, Nathaniel Christmas, 12th at the North American International Championships Indianapolis, and Daniel Oztiken, 4th at the Liverpool Regionals. Torkoal saw a few uses in the 2018 season as well, though stricter competition meant it was more of a niche choice than before. It still received several solid placements, and they are Alex Underhill, 1st, and Jo-Won Kim, 4th, respectively, at the Fort Wayne Regionals, Jonas Wiegel, 1st at the Bremen Regionals, Kevin Swastik, 8th at the Hartford Regionals, Sungil Nam, 6th at the Korean Autumn League, Don Check, 3rd, Daytona Beach Regionals, Alan Chia, 3rd at the Singapore Special Event, Stefano Monero, 7th at the Special Event Torino, Osri Fearman, 7th at the Special Event Kuala Lumpur, and Nicholas Bingham, 7th, Perth Regionals, and 4th at the Melbourne Regionals. But once the restricted format rolled in, Torkoal was sidelined completely, but satisfying knowing it would be back. Now we move on to Generation 8, and its limited Pokedex. Some teams were tried in early Sword and Shield OU, with Torkoal the setter of choice once again to enable threats. In addition to the usual Venusaur, now brandishing excellent new fire coverage and Weather Ball, there were also Darmanitan, Chlorophyll Shiftry, and Solar Power Charizard, the latter enjoying its new heavy-duty boots, while also enjoying Weather Ball. Such teams were fairly gimmicky, but had quite a bit of use that led to Torkoal being legitimately OU for a small time, and overall showed a glimpse of promise that would be delivered on later. Sun was also nice for somewhat slowing down the rampage of Dracovich's Fish's Ren. More immediately though, early UU was already severely threatened by Sun teams when supported by Ninetales, with Venusaur rampaging through much of the tier, but as early OU Sun tapered off, Torkoal and Darmanitan dropped into UU. Sun teams became less controversial in the sense of a hot take you might have, and more controversial in the sense of everyone hating it because of how ridiculously easily it destroyed everything. Darmanitan, Venusaur, Charizard, it all piled on relentlessly, with nearly no reasonable, reliably consistent counterplay to be found. The Sun threats were so strong, it almost didn't matter what was setting the drought, especially as heavy-duty boots made Torkoal's Stealth Rock less perpetually impactful and his Rapid Spin less outright necessary, but both were certainly appreciated. The latter especially since Charizard began wanting to run boots less and choice specs more, letting it really unlock an incredible level of solar power, and Torkoal was also valued for its ability to withstand some physical attacks on a team style not exactly renowned for its hit-taking prowess, which Ninetales would only exacerbate. Eventually, UU banned Venusaur, the most overwhelming of the Sun Sweepers, but Drought continued to be a powerful playstyle. That wasn't all either, as Torkoal was beginning to see some usage in OU again, and to more serious effect this time. The Venusaur Charizard tag team was ripping the metagame up with Specs, Solar Power, Zard's Weather Ball, performing absurd feats such as 2-hit killing Blissey and Toxapex. As a bonus, Cinderace was an utter menace under the sun. In addition to enabling these monsters, Torkoal was also valued for, unlike Ninetales, being able to take a couple of hits from opposing Cinderace, which would end up being so broken it was eventually banned. In addition to fueling these Sun threats to metagame-defining tournament-level wins, Torkoal finally had its first solo star appearance on the big stage. It went VGC style as an all-out attacker, but it wasn't bothering with any measly charcoal. It went with choice specs and unleashed its eruption on a singles format, with Trick Room's assistance of course. Sun Trick Room was easier to pull off now that Torkoal was a threat, and Trick Room setter Porygon could safely get in with the newly buffed negative priority switch move Teleport. Torkoal was such an independent threat that yes, while its teammates could enjoy Sun support, notably fellow Trick Room beneficiary Alolan Marowak, it was really more of the larger Trick Room apparatus than a dedicated Sun setter, so the lack of a Heat Rock extended Sun turns wasn't a problem, especially when the payoff was so eruptive. Torkoal also benefited from a new special ground move to replace Earth Power. While it was a good deal weaker, Scorching Sands also brought with it a wonderful 30% burn rate. Specs Torkoal was no gimmick either. It wouldn't have been relied on in a big tournament had it been, with the replay available here. And how did it perform? It threatened the opposing team all throughout the game, including deleting Clefable table in one shot, pulling off Specs Rapid Spin successfully, Starmie Who, and eventually winning the game by finishing off the OU Boogie Pokemon, Toxapex, with Scorching Sands. Talk about a star performance. This wouldn't become an OU standard by any means, but Torkoal was well and truly the real deal at this point. Even when the Pokédex expanded massively in the Crown Tundra, despite Sun getting knocked down several pegs, Torkoal continues to be worthwhile in OU. It took a while for it to take off, but once the new faces had settled the metagame into a recognizable shape, it also became recognizable just how vulnerable that shape was to getting trucked by Venusaur. There was no shortage of fire-type strength to pair with it either. Heatran, newly able to spam Eruption without being locked to a quiet nature, Victini, which loved bypassing his Stealth Rock weakness with heavy-duty boots to unleash ludicrous levels of V-Create power, and Blaziken, freed from Ubers and happy to go ballistic with its Flare Blitzes. Sun was always going to be on the specific side, but when it was used, Torkoal gave it a solid foundation. Funnily enough, it wouldn't be competing with Ninetales, but rather Alolan Ninetales and the Hail it set. Being more on the niche side meant it was still UU by usage, and it was much the same story there. While specific, and certainly not without its challenges, contending with Hippowdon Sand wasn't exactly pleasant. Sun would still, every once in a while, rear its head and pose a serious threat. After all, Venusaur under Sun absolutely devastated many metagame standards, Cobalion, Primarina, Tangrowth, Amoonguss, Celesteela, Togekiss, and more, and Torkoal as ever provided the bulky backbone it needed in this much stronger metagame. As one example, being able to withstand Entei's Burn Happy Sacred Fire and use it as an opportunity to Rapid Spin was incredibly useful. Overall, Torkoal's 8th generation was its most successful yet, and once again, we still have to get to VGC. No more Firium Z, no problem. Torkoal returned to bludgeoning opponents with its enormous eruptions and harsh heat waves once again, whether with Charcoal or with its new alternative, Choice Specs. Either way, it packed Earth Power to keep Incineroar out of its face and was a solid Trick Room setter in much the same way it had been in the 7th generation. There was no shortage of competition. It found itself commonly paired with Dusclops, whose incredible bulk made it one of the most consistent Trick Room setters. There was no shortage of competition, as these players on screen did exceptionally well with Torkoal. Interestingly, in 2021, Torkoal developed a new set that gave it use in restricted formats. It invested in bulk and used Citrus Berry for longevity, providing it unique defensive use against some of the scariest threats around. For instance, it could take +1 boosted Sacred Swords from Zacian Crown and a Wicked Blow from Choice Band Urshifu. Adding to this superb utility was Burning Jealousy as Stab, which would burn Dynamax Pokemon as their max moves provided boosts, and of course, Torkoal's Drought enabled Venusaur as a partner, with Venusaur under Sun being one of the most powerful Dynamax users around. Or Gigantamax rather. Torkoal had plenty of non-Dynamax utility too, further spreading status with the threat of Yawn Sleep and ensuring Incineroar wouldn't slow it down by weaponizing its huge defense to attack with Body Press. It was strange to see Torkoal sullen clashing with Kyogre's Rain, and yet, while Torkoal was not a metagame crusher, it did have a legitimate place in the format. In fact, it was even seen on a couple of teams with Kyogre, from these players on screen here. It was official. The 8th generation was Torkoal's best yet. It couldn't possibly top that, right? Yeah, never mind. Gen 9 introducing the photosynthesis ability on future Paradox Pokemon, along with terrestrialization, meaning anything could become a fire type, meant Sun was going to be more important than ever, and Torkoal was very much up to the task. Yes, it was still a Torkoal in the most power-crept generation of them all, so it wasn't going to be as consistently used as the Great Tusk and Iron Valiants, but Torkoal enabled these Pokemon to unique, terrifying effect. Forget the one-time use of booster energy, most commonly for speed. With Torkoal, you could have these overwhelmingly fast and strong Pokemon become even more overwhelmingly fast and effectively become stronger for having more opportunities with which to attack, and really become ridiculous more than they were already. And unlike their booster energy sets, they still have their item slot open. It was almost akin to many of the scariest Pokemon around also becoming Chlorophyll Sweepers when Torkoal showed up, leading to a newly enormous and thus dangerous variety of possible threats. Sun was far more than just Chlorophyll and Fire Pokemon now, though there was plenty of action in that department as well, with Terra Venusaur unlocking a new level of monstrous, while Iron Behemoth unleashed some ridiculous firepower worthy of his now banned relative Volcarona. Sometimes the fire and the future paradox overlapped, as with gouging fire before its ban. Sometimes it was more of a crossover, as with Raging Bolt making superb use of Weather Ball, and sometimes even water Pokemon got in on the Sunfield action. Yep, one of Torkoal's go-to partners was Walking Wake, whose Hydro Steam was indeed a water move that got stronger under Sun, and who of course enjoyed the pseudo third stab of a boosted flamethrower as well. As such, Torkoal was always a factor in Gen 9 OU, because though its usage was on the lower side, as is befitting a more particular team style like Sun, said team style was one of the most frightening things around for how it wound up more of the best Pokemon than you could fit on a team and watch them go berserk. Plus, though Torkoal was usually the concession Pokemon, the price you paid to unleash Walking Wake pulling off offense that would melt the mind of an old school Gen 3 player who just knows Calm Mind Suicune, sometimes you could get more out of it than just Rock, Spin, and Maximum Sun, though that was hardly a bad thing, especially with Torkoal's ability to switch into common Pokemon like Zamazenta. Yes, Torkoal was switching into a box art legendary in OU. How far it's come. Anyway, once again, Torkoal could and did unleash its Specs eruptions on OU. It would be less dedicated to Sun support, but seeing as how independently dangerous its teammates were already, this wasn't a problem, especially since Torkoal would now be supporting them by more directly blasting the opposing team. And of course, its trick rooming and lunar dancing friend Cresselia was always there as an option. Torkoal, OU Wallbreaker, in the most power crept generation ever. Indeed, Torkoal was a bona fide OU for a time, but this didn't last. Why? Well, specificity of playstyle keeping its usage down aside, it wound up being overtaken in viability by Ninetales of all things, which had gotten a huge boost with its newly found utility, Healing Wish. Though Torkoal was still a solid B rank, Ninetales was up in A-. So what of Torkoal's journey through the tiering rung? Oh boy, well Sun was solid in UU, so Torkoal had a place there, but so did Ninetales, which was much better. What about RU? Same deal. What about NU? Well, while Torkoal was hanging around in OU, Vulpix had gotten Drought banned from NU, so there was nothing for Torkoal to do there, and because NU banned Drought, it was banned in PU as well, so Torkoal had nothing to do there either. So astonishingly, in the same generation Torkoal was a genuine OU force, it was also untiered, or like in Gen 7, technically ZU, despite at the same time still being a worthwhile OU Pokemon. All in all, a serious roller coaster ride, once again improving on the previous generation, and once again we now head to VGC. Torkoal returned to VGC to set up Sun for itself and its teammates, with its own attacks once again supported to great effect by Trick Room. While Charcoal and Choice Specs were as fiery and ferocious as ever, if not more, with the power possibilities afforded by Terra Fire, Torkoal also brandished a new set this time around, the Eject Pack variant, which would use Overheat for a huge hit on the opponent, and upon its special attack dropping, the Eject Pack would kick in to promptly switch Torkoal out of battle, allowing a teammate to get in safely and take advantage of the Sun and potentially Trick Room. Additionally, if Torkoal led off against Incineroar and got intimidated, the Eject Pack would also activate, allowing Torkoal's switch-in replacement to turn the lead matchup in its favor. Torkoal was firing on all cylinders in terms of support with this set, as in addition to Overheat, Eruption, and Protect, it also strengthens its teammates with Helping Hand. It was especially good at supporting Jump Pluff, whose huge speed alongside Chlorophyll let it outrun everything in the game, and Hisuian Typhlosion, whose own eruptions were far stronger than Torkoal's by far when fueled by Sun. This was especially valuable because it allowed Torkoal team flexibility, in that it wasn't completely reliant on Trick Room, but could switch up and go with the more traditionally fast Sun onslaught, thus making the team more difficult to prepare for, since you didn't know what set of 4 Pokemon would be brought to a given match. Torkoal was also commonly used on Psychic Spam teams, with Indeedee F's Psychic Terrain enabling Gallade's powerful stab, as the Psychic Terrain blocking Fake Out allowed Trick Room to be set up more easily. This in turn contributed to Torkoal being seen together with Caloric's Ice to great success, depending on the regulation. Whether it was supporting with Eject Pack or all-out attacking, Torkoal's Sun support capabilities were incredibly valuable, and it wound up having its most successful generation of VGC by far. It was always viable and used quite a bit, including in the restricted regulations, but it was most seen in Regulation H, the metagame with no Paradox, Legendary, or restricted Pokemon. This format also saw Torkoal commonly pairing up and supporting another dangerous Chlorophyll user in Hisuian Lilligant. Torkoal had so many placements over the years, we've limited them as follows. Pre-Regulation H, we're sticking to top 5s only. Imagine that. Torkoal's so effective and popular, we had to limit its placements to top 5. But for Regulation H specifically, where there was no Legends or Paradox Pokemon allowed, Torkoal was used so much that we are limiting these placements to top 2s only. And after Regulation H, Torkoal fell off since it had to compete with two restricted drought setters in Groudon and Koraidon. Overall, Torkoal has had its best generation in the most power-crept of them all. Talk about a success story. Torkoal isn't quite at its previous level in the Pokemon Champions metagame, what with the return of Megas, but it's by no means shabby, and while it hasn't had that many placements, several of the placements it has had have been highly successful, proving Torkoal can still hack it with the big guns. One of its earliest placements was Jiang Jinhao, reaching 5th with it at the Champions Arena tournament, using Torkoal alongside Mega Charizard Y for a dual offensive Sunsetter onslaught, pairing Torkoal's powerful Charcoal Field Eruptions and Weather Balls with Mega Charizard Y's legendary Heat Waves and Overheats. And beyond the double drought was a triple fire for that matter, since Jinhao's team also had Incineroar. Torkoal also won an early Champions tournament, the Limitless M-A Tour in Spain, used by Pokefae, who paired it with one of the rarer new Megas perfectly suited for Trick Room, Mega Golurk. And if Trick Room wasn't the ideal strategy for a matchup, Torkoal could enable a faster mode by supporting none other than its old partner, Chlorophyll Venusaur. At the Korean Trainers Cup tournament, Yunho Park used Torkoal to reach 12th alongside two Megas, Kangaskhan and Blastoise, with Trick Room support from the metagame staple for Regirock. Then at the first official Champions Regional, Indianapolis, Jeremy Barnes used the exact same team as Yunho and reached 19th. Finally, at the Japan Championships, Yuto Kimura reached 13th with another Farigiraf supported dual Mega combination alongside Torkoal, also using Kangaskhan, but having Aerodactyl as the second. Overall, Torkoal doesn't look like it's going anywhere. Imagine that, Torkoal a competitive staple. And now we can finally answer the question, how good was Torkoal actually? Well, it actually found a niche in its debut generation of NU, despite the tier's inception coming far after the fact. But then it spent several gens doing absolutely nothing. Its excellent supporting move pool was let down by its atrocious speed and lack of recovery. Torkoal found redemption in Gen 7 though, reviving Drought and kicking off a legitimate career in both singles and VGC. It appeared even in standard OU to great effect, and while both formats usually saw it in a support role, it could even go on the offensive with Eruption. Torkoal going from one of the worst Pokemon in the game to a legitimate force is one of the most heartwarming stories in the competitive scene. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Don Creek, Eric Dissing, Espion Lover, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Game Slayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Palamute, Plutonian Shores, Schmooter, Seagulls Incorporated, Sojiro Sakura, Spavoon, Gylaria, Soros and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Tyler, Kiboflu, Wardeen, Zachary Stimson, Zathor for their major support of our videos.